Hey there, Emmanuel here from WebDevFuel, and welcome back to the second part of the Go SaaS API third-party integration series. So in this one, we'll go over how to integrate with the database so we can create multiple integrations with the same app. And also we'll be able to fetch tags from an app without having to pass its quote-unquote slug, but instead the integration ID. So if you go ahead and watch the previous video, you'll see that in order to be able to grab the tags from a particular app, so either ActiveCampaign or ConvertKit, we had to pass something like /tags and then /ActiveCampaign or /ConvertKit. So we want to go from this, so /tags and then passing the app here, to having this. So we want to pass /integrations, then we want to pass the ID of a particular integration, and finally we want to pass /tags to let the program know that we want to fetch a list of tags from this particular integration. But before we continue, if you want to learn more in depth how to build a SaaS web application from scratch using HTMX and Go, and get one-on-one help when doing it, click the link below to join the HTMX Go SaaS Blueprint, a complete A to Z course on how to build and launch a SaaS web application using HTMX, Go, PostgreSQL, Tailwind CSS, and other technologies. I'm still building the course, so if you want to get notified and get free access to exclusive videos before they are released, go to webdevfuel.com/HGSB or click the link in the description down below and sign up there. So we first want to start by installing the packages necessary to connect our Go program to a PostgreSQL database. And in order to do this, we'll need to install three different packages. First of all, we want to install the SQLX package. Then we want to install the PostgreSQL driver, which is going to be PGX. And then we also want to install this standard library, which is essentially a bridge between this PGX package and the SQLX package. So let's copy these three commands, and then inside our terminal, let's navigate to our project directory and let's paste this and let's run this command. So as you can see, this now went ahead and installed. So let's restart the program and let's take a look at the next steps. So next we want to create a db.go file inside a newly created db directory with a function that opens a connection to the database and also polls the database to ensure that the connection was successfully established. So as you can see, we are going to be using this connect method, which again not only does the connection to the database but also pings the database to ensure that the connection was actually established. So let's copy this, and then inside of the code editor, let's create a new db directory, and here let's create a new db.go file. And let's paste this code snippet. Now make sure that you have here the package defined also as db, and then we want to essentially have a function that's called connect. This is going to return a pointer to sqlx.db and also a possible error. Then inside of it, we want to call sqlx.connect. And if we take a look here at the documentation, it says that connect to a database and verifies with a ping, just like we said. And then we want to pass two different things. First of all, we want to pass the driver name, which is going to be PGX. And then we want to pass the string that is going to allow us to connect to the database. And then we want to check to see if we have any errors. If we don't, if we have some kind of error inside of this function, we want to return nil and also the error, and if not, we want to return the connection and the error as nil. Now, to ensure that we can connect with the PostgreSQL database, let's create it and set the database URL environment variable, and don't forget to adjust the connection URL to your local development environment. So if you want to change here the database name, you can. And then also make sure that you change here the PostgreSQL URI to one that is appropriate for your local development environment. So stuff like the username, you might want to change this. And then also probably the port, if you are using a different port to connect to PostgreSQL. And then here the database name can be this one, or if you want you can change it to something else. So let's copy this first of all so we can connect to PostgreSQL. Let's stop here the program, and then after we connect, let's copy this to create the new database. And now let's exit this, and we can now export here this variable. So let's copy this, and then inside of the terminal, let's paste this to ensure that we have this variable available to us. And now let's connect to the database from within the main function. So let's copy this code snippet. Let's navigate to main.go. And now, before running all of this code, so let's paste this as the first thing inside of the main function. We want to paste this code snippet, and then let's save the file so that this imports. So as you can see, we are importing this DB package from our project directory, or from our quote-unquote main package. So this is going to come from web.dev-fuel, and then go SaaS API third-party integration, and finally DB. And then we call here the connect. We want to check to see if there's an error. If we have any kind of error, we want to log this as a fatal error, so that the program, so that essentially we know that an error occurred. And then we also want to defer the closing of the connection, so that when our main program stops running, the connection to the database is closed. So with this in mind, now let's give this a try inside of the terminal, and as it says here, if we don't see any errors, it means that the connection was successfully established, since the connect method also pings the database to test the connection. So now let's run here the error command, and as you can see, it says here building running, so now the program is correctly running, and we don't see here any kind of errors, which means that we were able to successfully connect to the database. Now the next step is for us to create a new taskfile.yaml file to run tasks with the GoTask package. Now, if you're not familiar with the task package, as it says here on the documentation, this is a task runner, which is a simpler make alternative written in Go, and this will essentially allow us to run commands inside of our terminal. And if we take a look here at our notes, this will make it easy to run tasks that are common when working with migrations, like creating the up and down pair of migration files and migrating the database without having to type the commands over and over again. Now, to make it easy for you to install this package, I'm going to leave a link in the description down below to this GitHub repo, so to the repository of the GoTask package. So you can take a look here at the repo, and also if you want to explore a little bit more here on the documentation. So with this in mind, now let's copy this YAML file content, and then inside of our code editor, let's create here a new file. So we need to call this one taskfile.yaml, and then let's paste the contents in here, and let's also take a look at everything that's happening inside of this file. So we first need to define the tasks that we want to have available to us, and then we need to set the name of a particular task. In this case, it is, for example, migrate-create, and then we need to define the commands that we want to run when we are running this task inside of our terminal. So in this case, we want to create a new migration, so this is going to use the migrate package. Then we want to use the create here command. We need to pass the extension, which is going to be SQL. Then we want to tell it what the directory of our migrations is going to be. And finally, we want to tell it that it is going to be sequential. And we also want to grab the CLI arguments so that we are able to pass the name of our migration into this command. And similar to the task package, I'm going to also leave a link in the description down below so you can see the repository of the Golang migrate package, which, as it says here, this is a database migration package, and it provides both a CLI and also a Golang library, but in this case we are only interested in the CLI library. Now, if you want to see exactly how to install this, you can go over the documentation, or if you also prefer, I can go ahead and create another video where we go more in depth into how to install these type of packages, so for example the migrate one or even the task package. So with this in mind, let's continue here and let's go over exactly everything else that's happening inside of this file. So we also have this migrate up command, which will allow us to go up on our migrations. So as you can see, we want to run here migrate, then we want to pass the database, which is going to come from an environment variable that needs to be set inside of our terminal when we are running this command. And then we also want to pass here the path, which is also going to be db and then / migrations, just like we have here. And finally, we want to pass here up to tell it that we want to go up on our migrations. And like I said, we are required to set this environment variable to run this task, but in our case, we've already went ahead and set up the environment variable, so we shouldn't have any kind of trouble. But we want to tell here this task package that it is required by using this requires keyword, and then we pass the vars or the variables, which in this case it is going to be here an array, and inside of this array we need to pass the variable that we want to be required. And in the case of the migrate down task, we want to do the exact same thing, but in the case of this task we want to say here down to tell the migrate package that we want to roll back our migrations. With this in mind, let's continue. And the next step is for us to create our initial migrations files with the migrate create task. So as you can see here, we want to say here task, which is the task package. So this is the executable that we have available to us after we install this package globally. And then we want to say the name of our task, which is going to be migrate-create. And finally, we need to pass the name of this migration file, which is going to create both the up and down migration. And in this case, we want this to be initial. So let's copy this. And then inside our project directory, let's paste this command and let's run this. And now, after running the command with initial as the CLI argument, two different files are going to be created. So we are going to have this initial.up.sql file, which has the number 1, and that's because the migrations are going to be sequential. And then it is going to create also a file for the down migration. So as you can see here, it went ahead and did exactly that inside of our project directory. So now we are ready to add the statements to the SQL files to be able to migrate our database. So let's copy this and then we'll take a look at all of the tables that we want to create. So inside of our project directory here, and then inside of the DB directory, then migrations, we want to open the initial.up.sql file and we want to paste the following contents. And let's also copy, since we're already there, this one, which is the down migrations, to allow us to roll back the migrations. And we want to also paste this in here and save the file. So now we want to do the following. We want to first of all create an apps table, which is going to have an ID, a name, and also a slug. Then we want to create the app fields table, which is going to have an ID, which is also going to be the primary key. Then we want to have the app ID and also a field. And this is going to have a foreign key constraint, and it is going to reference the apps table that we've just created. So this is essentially going to reference this ID from the apps table. Then we also want to create an integrations table, and this is going to have a name. This is also going to have an app ID, which is also going to reference the ID from this table. And finally, we want to create the integration app field values table, which is going to have also a primary key, which is going to be the ID. And this one is going to have two different foreign key constraints. So we are going to have the integration ID, and also we are going to have here the app field ID, and finally the value of this. And what all of this is essentially going to allow us to do is we'll be able to, inside of the database, have arbitrary fields for each one of our apps, and then we'll be able to create integrations for each one of those apps and give a value that is associated with that particular integration. So first of all, we'll have the apps, which for example are going to be ActiveCampaign or ConvertKit. Then we are going to have the app fields. So for each one of these apps, we want to have specific fields that are specific for those applications. So for example, in the case of ActiveCampaign, we want to have the app URL and also we want to actually have the API URL and also the API key. But in the case of ConvertKit, we don't need to have as a field the API URL, and that's because it is going to be static. So in that case, we're actually going to be needing the API key and an API secret. And we essentially want to have this entire structure to be able to accommodate those differences between the apps when it comes to the fields that we'll be needing in the future to fill in order to be able to create a new integration. Then we are going to have the integration, so you can think of this as essentially the integrations that a user will be able to create inside of the application, and we can give this a name. So we can say, for example, my ActiveCampaign integration, and this is going to reference the app ID, so we can track what the application this integration is currently connected to. And finally, we'll have this to be able to map between a particular integration. So if we have an integration to ActiveCampaign, then we want to map this to an app field ID, and it is going to have a value. So we can store stuff like, again, the API URL or the API key. And inside the down.sql file, we want to essentially drop all of the tables that we've created inside of this file in the reverse order. So since we are first of all creating apps, then app fields, integration, and finally this one. So we drop this one, then integrations, then app fields, and finally the apps table. And just like this, we are able to create all of these tables that will be able to store data in, and then we can reverse also the migration or rollback. Now let's move back to our nodes. And the next step is for us to run the migrate up task, which is going to allow us to migrate our database. So let's move here back to our project directory and let's try this. And now if we establish a connection to our database from a database client, like for example, Beekeeper Studio, as you can see, all of the tables were successfully created. So we are now connected to the database that we've previously went ahead and created. And we have the app fields, the apps, and all of the other tables that we've created. So now let's restart the program and let's move back to our code examples. And we're now ready to create our seed migration files with the migrate create task. So this will make it easier to load data into our database without having to do it manually. So let's copy this and let's actually go ahead and stop this again. And now we can run this to be able to create a new pair of migration files. So let's run this, and now we have here the number 2 since this is sequential, and then we have seed.up.sql and also seed.down.sql. But before we continue, if you want to learn more in depth how to build a SaaS web application from scratch using HTMX and Go and get one-on-one help when doing it, click the link below to join the HTMX Go SaaS Blueprint, a complete A to Z course on how to build and launch a SaaS web application using HTMX, Go, PostgreSQL, Tailwind CSS, and other technologies. I'm still building the course, so if you want to get notified and get free access to exclusive videos before they are released, go to webdevfuel.com/HGSB or click the link in the description down below and sign up there. And now we are ready to add the statements to the up SQL file, since we won't need to add anything to the down SQL file. So when running the migrations down, the initial migration will already drop all of the tables, so the data will also be deleted. So in this case, we only want to add contents to the seed.up.sql file. So let's copy this, and then inside our code editor, let's close this one, and then let's open the seed.up.sql file, and let's paste this content here. So what we essentially want to do here is we want to add some seeds to our database to have both an ActiveCampaign app, then we also want to seed it with the app fields, then we want to seed it with the integration, and finally with the integration app field values. So as you can see here, we have insert into apps, then we want to pass the name of this app and also the slug, so it is going to be ActiveCampaign and then ActiveCampaign all lowercase. Then we want to insert into the app fields both the API key and also the API URL. Then we want to create a new integration and we want to add the app field values, which are going to be at this moment empty, and that's because I'm going to override these values later with the private API key and also API URL that I have available, and that's because again I don't want to be exposing both my ActiveCampaign or ConvertKit accounts. So what this essentially means is that we'll be able to create here, as you can see, we have integration app field values and we pass here the integration ID, which is going to be this one. Then we want to pass the app field ID, which is going to be 1, so it is this one, the first one that we've created. In this case it would be the API key, and then we do the exact same thing for this one. It is in this case the API URL, and we could pass some kind of value. So let's actually override this to make sure that this is a bit easier to understand. So this would be the API key, this would be the API URL, and then we want to do the exact same thing for ConvertKit. So we want to create a new app. This one is going to be ConvertKit and then also ConvertKit all lowercase. And we also want to insert here the app fields. In this case, we only need the API key and the API secret. And then we want to create a new integration and also set the field values for this particular integration. So in this case, it would be the API key, and here we would have the API secret. And with this structure, we are able to, in the future, if you want to add additional applications to our integration or to our web application that is able to integrate with these third-party applications, that it is going to be much easier for us to do that. And then we simply need to add the logic to be able to make the requests to those particular apps, and it makes it much easier for us to have this kind of arbitrary field values inside of the database. Now the next step is for us to run the migrate up task again to be able to seed our database. So let's move here to our project directory, let's run this, and now inside of our database client, let's take a look and see everything that was created here. So we have the apps first of all, so we have both of these. Then we also have the integrations, so we've created 2 different integrations. Then we have here the apps that are related to this integration. So if we take a look here at the ActiveCampaign, the app is going to be ActiveCampaign. And finally, we also have the app fields. So for each one of the app, we're going to have fields. So in this case, if we take a look, for example, API secret, which is something that only is needed inside of ConvertKit, and we take a look at the app, it is going to be ConvertKit. And then if we take a look finally at the integration app fields, we are going to have here a relationship between this table and then the integration and also the app fields tables. And finally, we are going to have the values. So like we've set them there, API key, API URL, also API key for ConvertKit, and finally the API secret. Now we're finally ready to modify our code to use the database as a source of truth instead of using the values from the environment variables. And we'll start with creating 2 functions, one to get the integration app slug from the database and another to get a field value based on the integration ID that we pass when making a request to our web server. So let's copy this, and then inside our code editor, let's navigate to integration and then integration.go, and let's paste this here, and let's take a look at everything that's happening with both of these functions. So this one, first of all, one thing to keep in mind is that this one is going to be public since it starts with the uppercase, and this one is going to be private to this package since it starts with lowercase. So this one is going to allow us to get the integration app based on the integration ID. So we want to pass here the integration ID and also a connection to the database. And this is going to return the slug. So it is going to be a string and also a possible error. And inside of this function, we want to do the following. First, we want to start by initializing a new string. So we are going to call this one app. And then we want to query our database. So we are going to be using this query row method. And the SQL statement is going to be the following. We want to select apps.slug from integrations. Then we want to left join the apps table. So we are going to do here a left join on integrations.appid equals apps.id. And then we are going to say that we want to select where the integrations.id is going to be this $1. So this is going to be replaced with the ID that we pass here as an argument. So what this essentially means is that we are going to be able to grab the app slug based on the integration ID that we pass into this function. And then finally, we want to use the scan method to be able to scan the results that we get from the database. And we are going to pass here as the first and only argument a reference to this app string. So it essentially modifies the original value with here the slug that we select from the database. Then we want to check to see if the error is different than nil. If it is different than nil, then we want to return the empty string and also the error. And if not, we want to return the app and the error as nil. Now let's take a look at the get field value function. And this is going to take a connection to the database. It is also going to take the ID of the integration, then the value that we want to grab from the database. So this is essentially going to be the value key. And then we also want to pass the destination that we want to put the value into after we are able to successfully scan it. Then we want to return con.queryRow. So we want to use the exact same method that we've used up here. And inside of it, we want to use the following SQL statement. So first, we want to select integration app field values.value. So if we take a look here at Beekeeper Studio, we want to, in other words, be able to grab here the value that we have stored inside of this table. So it would be things like the API key, API URL, or API secret. Then we want to say here from integration app field values. We also want to left join the app fields. So we are essentially able to grab the value name. So we are going to say here left join app fields on integration app field values.app field ID, which is going to equal app fields.id. And then finally, we want to say where integration app field values.integration ID is going to be equal $1. So it is going to be the first argument that we pass here. So this is going to be the integration ID, and the field is going to equal $2. So it is going to be this value that we pass here. So again, keep in mind that this is going to essentially be the key of the field that we want to grab. So if we take a look here at the app fields table, we have this field column, which is going to be, for example, API key, API URL, or API underscore secret. And we essentially want to pass this key into this function to be able to grab again the value that is associated with it from this table based on this field key that we have here. Now that we went over exactly what's happening inside both of these functions, the next step is for us to update both the new ActiveCampaign integration function and also the new ConvertKit function to get their values from the database according to the needs of each app. So one thing to keep in mind again is that each one of these applications are going to have specific needs when it comes to fetching their APIs, and that's the reason we are doing this entire database structure to be able to have arbitrary fields and arbitrary values inside of the database. And then inside each one of these functions, now we want to add the logic to be able to initialize their specific struct with the data that we are grabbing from the database. So let's start by copying this one for ActiveCampaign, and then inside our code editor, let's navigate to integration and then ActiveCampaign.go. And we want to replace this function that we have here with the one that we've just copied. So we want to pass into this, first of all, the ID of the integration, and then also a connection to the database. and this is also going to return a pointer to ActiveCampaign integration. So we want to essentially return this struct and a possible error. And then inside of the function, we want to start by initializing two different strings. So first of all, API key and then API URL. And now we are going to use the function that we've just went ahead and created, which is the getFieldValue function, to be able to grab the values from the database. And then we are going to pass both the API key and also the API URL variables as destination to be able to override both of these values with the API key and the API URL. So here we say error, which is going to equal the function that we want to call. Then we want to pass the connection, the ID. Then we want to pass here the field key, which is going to be API_key, and finally the destination. Then we want to do the exact same thing here. So in this case, we want to pass API_URL and then API URL. So this is going to be a reference to this variable. And then we want to, in both of these cases, to check to see if the error is different than nil. If it is, then we want to return nil and also the error. And finally, we can return this struct, the ActiveCampaign integration struct, with the values that we pass here. So we want to pass the API URL and also the API key. And in this case, the text path is going to be the same, so we don't want to make any changes to it. Now let's go ahead and copy the function for ConvertKit, and let's navigate here to integration and then convertkit.go, and let's do the exact same thing. So we want to replace this function with the one that we've just copied. And here we do the exact same thing. We pass the ID and the connection, and we return this struct, which is going to be a pointer to ConvertKit integration. Then inside of the function, we want to initialize the API key and the API secret, and we want to use the exact same function that we've created, the getFieldValue function. And in this case, we want to pass the API key and a reference to this variable, and then API_secret and a reference to this variable. And then we want to initialize this, so we return a reference to this struct, and then we pass here the API key, the API secret, the API URL, which is going to be static, and the text path, which is also going to be static. Now, if we open the main.go file, we'll see an error, and that's because we've modified both functions. So if we go ahead and open here main.go, as you can see, it says here not enough arguments in call to integration.new ActiveCampaign integration, and the same thing for the new ConvertKit integration function. So that means that we now need to update the code to grab the app based on the integration ID and pass that ID to the functions along with a database connection. So let's copy this code snippet to make the changes to our code, and then let's update this entire part of our code. So we want to remove this entire route that we have here and replace it with the code snippet that we've just went ahead and copied. So now let's go over all of the changes that we have inside of this code snippet. So first, we want to add here a different pattern. So in this case, it is going to be integrations/ID/tags. So in this case, instead of grabbing the app slug, we want to grab the ID of the integration. Then inside of the function, we want to do the following. First, we want to start by grabbing the ID. So we want to use here the URL param method to be able to grab this from our URL. Then we want to use here the string conversion package and this method to be able to transform this from a string into an integer. So after using the method, we are going to get back here both the int and also a possible error. Then we want to check to see if the error is different than nil. So we are going to get an error in case we are not able to transform this string into an integer. Then we want to grab the integration app. So we pass here integration, and then we say get integration app. We want to pass the ID and also a connection to the database. So if you recall, we went ahead and added this function to be able to fetch the database and get the app slug based on the integration ID. Then the next step is going to be for us to check to see if the error exists, and if it exists, then we want to return that error back to the client. And finally, we have here available to us the app slug. So now we want to check to see if the app is either ActiveCampaign or ConvertKit. In the case of ActiveCampaign, we want to pass here integration.new ActiveCampaign integration, and we want to pass here the ID and also the connection to the database. And after doing that, we are able to again use this exact same function to be able to get the integration tags from this app API. And then we want to do the exact same thing for ConvertKit. So we pass here the new ConvertKit integration function, and we need to pass into it the ID of the integration and also a connection to the database. And after doing that, we now have here available to us this struct, so we can pass this into this get integration tags function, and just like this we are also able to successfully fetch the list of tags from the ConvertKit app. So now we're finally ready to update the field values inside of the database to ensure that the requests to both ActiveCampaign and the ConvertKit API is made successfully and give all of this a try. So I'm going to move here back to the PostgreSQL client, and inside of it the changes that we now want to make are the following. So we want to change here the values of all of this stuff that we have inside of the integration app field values table. So we want to change this from API key to an actual API key from an ActiveCampaign account. Same thing for this one. And then we want to change for the ConvertKit app the API key and the API secret. So I'm going to go ahead and make these changes, and I'll come back in just a second so we can give this a try inside of the terminal. So with all of the changes made to the database, we now can start our program by using the R command. And then let's open here a new pane and let's give all of this a try. So first we want to curl here the tags from the ActiveCampaign app. And then we also want to pipe this into JQ to make sure that this is all nicely printed here to our terminal. So now after running all of this, as you can see, we are getting this back, and then also the name is going to be redacted to make sure that I don't expose any of the information inside of my ActiveCampaign account. And then let's do the exact same thing for this other application for the ConvertKit case. So let's also pipe this into JQ, and then let's give this a try. And as you can see, we also get here a list of tags. We get the ID of each one of the tags, and then also the name, which again is going to be redacted. So this is it. As you can see, it is pretty simple for us to turn the previous quote-unquote dumb integration that we've created into a smart one. So we now have inside of this web application a database structure that will allow us to have arbitrary fields and arbitrary values for each one of the apps and integrations that we might want to add in the future, which is really cool because we don't need to create additional tables for each one of the apps. And we now also have a way to be able to initialize each one of these integrations by using the fields that we get from the database. I hope this series was helpful to you and you now better understand how to build complex integrations inside of a Golang API and how to integrate with third-party applications, and also how to better take advantage of interfaces inside of Go to be able to build complex functionality like we've built during this series. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.